This video is going to walk you through some ideas from my book. Came out a few years ago, called The Heresy of Heresies, A Defense of Christian Common Sense Realism. And the other two videos walked you through the introduction to the book, and the last video walked you through the part 1 of chapter 1, called Reflecting on What Is. This video is going to walk you through what I mean by common sense ontological realism. It's kind of a big, long list of words there, but I want to walk you through what I mean by it from the book, and I'll be reading some passages and then stopping to say a few words about some of those passages as we go through it. So, all right, here we go. Common sense, this is 1.1 of the text. So, common sense ontological realism. 1.1.1. Fossers have to be very precise in their numbering system. Sometimes I just think all the things I've written are pretty funny. Might be the only one who thinks that, but solipsistic humor. All right. Common. By common sense ontological realism, I mean two things. There's two things I mean by common in common sense. First, I mean that the nature of reality can be known in common by multiple people simultaneously. Okay, so I think multiple people at the same time can have in common the same thing. Okay, this is the sense of communis, understood as communal or public, as opposed to idiosyncratic. We don't each have our own reality. Just reminded of what is that book? Something like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, or something like that. Is that the name of it? You might think that men and women have different realities, but maybe they are from different planets. But they certainly don't have different realities. All right, sorry, back to the text here. We don't each have our own reality, right? It's not like you've got your reality and I've got mine. That's not how things are. Okay. Reality is something we have in common. The form of realism I defend in the book is one in which the very nature of reality can be grasped by any serious inquirer. It is a view that the understanding of reality is accessible and can be had in common with others. Of course, this notion of common requires that the very same reality can be present before the mind of all inquirers, and that each inquirer can equally perceive the same objects, and therefore have the same conception of reality. Okay, so this might require a bit more than you might be willing to allow here in our in our discussion. Okay. Now, of course, this requires a longer story about the nature of perception and a rejection of what Dallas Willard calls a Midas touch epistemology. Okay, so this is footnote 4 here in this chapter. This comes from Dallas Willard's paper called Predication as Originary Violence. And as of the last I checked, all of Dallas Willard's academic papers can be found on his organization's website at dwillard.org. dwillard.org. And so you can find that paper there if you want to read it yourself. It's not a particularly easy paper, but I think you'll find it worthwhile working through it. So this is a quotation from that paper. He says, and the paper, let's see. Yeah, you can also see his paper called Toward a Phenomenology of Reality, which is also a very good defense of the epistemology required for realism that I'm promoting here. For a common sense realist view of perception that is needed as a background for common sense realism, you can see Robert Audy's book called Epistemology, Chapter 1. That's not an easy chapter at all by Robert Audy on a realist understanding of perception, but that view of perception goes nicely with the metaphysics I'm defending in this book, so you can check that out. So let me just say something about the Midas touch epistemology. I don't go into that in detail here, maybe a little bit in the chapter on relativism, but you remember the story about King Midas, right? Anything he touched turned to gold. And so the idea of a Midas touch epistemology is this idea that somehow our minds reach out of our intellects and touch reality and make reality what it is. I think that view of reality has to be totally rejected in order to get at the common sense view of reality that I'm defending here. Okay. So the second thing I mean by common sense realism is that the nature of reality can be seen directly through everyday experiences. Okay, so this is like, by common I mean ordinary here. And in chapters 2 and 3 of the book, I'm going to argue that common everyday experiences combined with patient reflection can lead us to the nature of existence. So, in other words, by just looking around at the things that we've seen here, the sky, rocks, fence, water, chair, a book, hat, whatever. From those common experiences, by thinking about those, we can grasp ultimately the nature of reality itself. Okay, so now there's some steps in that, and I go through that in some detail in the further chapters. But this approach to metaphysics is one that takes the common ordinary experience of the world around us and our own mental life as the basis for the account of what is, right? So this is where I think we'll talk about the realism part in a moment. So that's common. By common I mean it can be had in common, communis, and I also mean ordinary. Okay, those two ideas. Okay, 1.1.2. We did common, now let's do sense in the common sense. By common sense realism, I mean that our understanding of what is comes to us primarily through our senses. I take the notion of senses to be sufficiently broad as to include an interior, mental sense or awareness of reality that is not sense perceptible. The notion of sense that I'll be working with throughout the book is one that doesn't limit sense to the five senses. Okay, so there's the five senses. That's going to be obvious in a common sense view, but there's also senses broader than that. So if you are aware of your internal life, if you're thinking about your thoughts, or if you're reflecting on your own emotional states or something in your interior life, that's a form of sense. Maybe call it your interior sense, or maybe better, rational reflection. That's I think a better way to think about the broad sense of sense, the broad notion of sense that I'm dealing with. So when we sense our pains and we sense our emotions, when we sense our thoughts as thinking and reflecting beings, neither what we sense nor how we sense it is physical. That's right. That's my shot across the bow towards any form of materialist monism or mind-brain identity. Right. The things we sense, when we sense, are what we sense. In our sense experiences. When I think about my pain states, right, what I'm thinking about there is not something physical. And the thing by means of which I think about it, my mind, is not physical either. This is a non-physical reality and a non-physical way of sensing. Mode of sensing would be better. Okay. Neither what we sense nor how we sense it is physical when we sense interiorly. We still sense these realities. So by sense, I mean both our five physical senses plus reflection. Reflection is our mind's ability to sense our own mental realities which occur internal to ourselves. Okay, so our mental realities that occur inside of us, those things are also a form of sense. All right. 1.1.3. So this is the ontological realism part of common sense ontological realism. A short little paragraph here. By common sense ontological realism, I mean realism pertaining to being, to what is. One can be a realist about many things in philosophy, for example, physical objects, properties, universals, possibilia, ethical or aesthetic qualities, numbers, etc. Ontological realism is a realism about existence itself and anything which exists. Ontological realism, in this sense, I'm using the term, means that existing things exist and existence itself exists. In addition, the existence of things and the existence of self is independent from whether there are any human minds. Reality is real apart from how we feel about it. Right, so this is just roughly the idea that the nature of reality, ontology, metaphysics, what is ultimately real, is independent from us. Right? There are real things, and the nature of reality was what it was before any of us existed, or before humans existed at all. Now, the question of the dependence of reality upon God and God's mind, that's a separate kind of question, but I'm talking about human minds here, right? Ontological realism. There's a reality that's independent of And in some ways, with respect to God's relationship to reality, even things that exist outside of God are non-identical to God on the Christian view of things. Now that's a longer story also, but it's I think to specify that is to distinguish the Christian vision of the nature of reality from other religious types of religious visions of the nature of reality. Okay, so all right, so that gets us through 1.1, what I mean by common sense ontological realism. All right, thanks for watching.